Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with the team as we continue to tell your story. Now, the South African Banking Risk Information Centre, SABRIC, on behalf of the banking industry, has released its annual crime stats for 2018. There's been a 100% increase in bank robberies over the past year, while credit and debit card fraud has also seen a steady rise. The combined cross-card fraud losses on South Africa issued cards saw an 18% increase, that is from 2017 to 2018, with credit card fraud increasing by 18.4% and debit card fraud increasing by 17.5%. Now, we look at these numbers now with SABRIC's spokesperson, Kevin Twiname. Good afternoon to you, Kevin. Thank you so much for coming through.
Good afternoon, Police, and thank you for having me on your show.
Now, the report talks about a number of fraudulent activities. Before we get to the numbers and the percentages, really, school us a bit on the different types of fraud that have been identified relating to banks and clients.
Good. Well, there are basically two areas. What we refer to as digital banking fraud. And that entails the area of online banking, app banking, mobile banking, and then obviously card fraud, which is subcategorized into a number of them, being card not present, lost and stolen card, and so forth.
And which is quite scary, as I was saying to you off air now, that a lot of us are, we depend so much on banking online, for example. So this means that we're not safe at all.
Look, absolutely. If you look at the figures, one looks at the figures, you would really think, wow, nothing is secure. But in fact, our findings is that these platforms are very secure. It is unfortunately, in the majority of cases, the human link, where in the info security chain, that is exposed and exploited.
But how does that happen? Perhaps when I give someone else's my login details, for example?
Very important. For example, you've just touched on it. A PIN and password are not necessarily only personal, they're absolutely confidential. And that is your responsibility to ensure that that remains absolutely confidential. Once it's shared with someone else, you've already compromised that portion of secure of the secure channel. Secondly, in a card is issued to a particular individual, and also bear in mind that that card then should remain with an individual, not be shared with someone else, because once you do that, you're also compromising the secure environment from a PIN, password, whatever the case may be.
Okay, so there's some sort of human error to all of this. Otherwise, everything would be secured.
We must also bear in mind that in most of these incidents, there is an element of social engineering from the criminal side that facilitates this. In other words, for you to share these things, unknowingly share your PIN number with someone, given the social in engineering tactics they use to actually source this information. And there are a variety. We refer to things like vishing, phishing, and smishing, which are terms that we use in the banking. Obviously, phishing is your email that is sent to you, sent to an individual, unknowing and thinking that it comes from an authentic environment.
You respond.
Then goes over to a spoof site, and sources their confidential and personal detail, which exposes them and become vulnerable to, like, for example, online platforms and so forth. In the vishing, which is actually very rife at the moment, is something that we're really concerned about. Is that criminals purporting to be bank officials are actually contacting clients per telephone, and getting them to reveal one-time PINs while they're actually transacting on those cards, for example, in card not present
and
cases.
I've seen messages from the different banks saying that we will never ask for your PIN number, for example, over the phone.
Well, that's very important that the general public out there know that. A bank will not phone you and ask you for your personal or particularly confidential information relating to your bank, like PIN numbers and so forth. Never. It won't happen. So if someone does call you purporting to be the bank and asking for one-time passwords or PINs, the suggestion is put the phone down.
Put the phone down. And I remember at one point I was almost became a victim to all of this. got an SMS with a specific number. Then the person SMS'd me back to say, I mistakenly sent a number to your phone. Please SMS me back the number. And I think at that particular point I was, brave enough to say, listen, if you sent the number to me, you should have it on your sent items. So look for that number on your phone. A few hours later, somebody was busy trying to do a SIM swap with my number. So I suppose those are some of the problems that you come across.
Absolutely, mobile banking is one of those. I think quite a large portion in this, probably in the region of in excess of 80%, coincide with things like SIM swaps. But obviously, to get there, they need your details. So there will be a form of social engineering tactics that they utilize to be able to get certain detail before they get there. So also bear in mind that this is not a process that happens in 5 minutes and it's over. Criminals make sure that they glean the necessary information or intelligence to be able to ensure that they get to your bank account.
All right. So we've spoken about phishing and vishing. Smishing. What's smishing?
Well, you touched on smishing. That's I think most of us have received SMSs where we've won substantial amounts of money, and once you go into that takes you to a platform where you're then also again requested to provide personal and confidential information, which exposes you eventually to and becoming a victim of fraud.
But apart from this digital criminal activities, really, let's talk about different modus operandi that the criminals also use to rob clients. What's the most common ones?
Well, one area of concern, and funny enough, the stats reveal quite a substantial decrease in this, but the decrease may be misleading in the sense that it's not really happening. It is still rife out there, is where bank clients making large cash withdrawals at banks, at ATMs, are being followed to a desolate or quiet spot, either en route to home, en route to a business, and they're being robbed of that cash, sometimes with tragic consequences. So it is, and the amounts are quite substantial in some cases. So there is a huge concern and bear in mind the banks don't lose any cash there. It's solely a victim. The general public or the individual client is the victim in this case, and also the losses are attributed to that. So the banks are very concerned about this. And much work has been done. Probably the reason you're seeing the decrease, some of the work that's being done in the background in conjunction with law enforcement and the South African Police Service in addressing this to mitigate this type of crime.
Does it only happen to those who withdraw cash from the ATMs or even from tellers inside the bank? Because I remember some people who have the view that, listen, if I were to go withdraw 100,000 rand, from inside, from a teller, and then someone follows me, then it surely shows that there may be some internal cooperation between the bank staff and perhaps the thieves.
Absolutely, Palisa. I think the banking industry acknowledges, and the bank acknowledge that there certainly could be staff involvement in some of these. But bear in mind that where these allegations are made, they are thoroughly investigated internally also. Without going into much detail, but there are measures in being able to determine if there was contact with particular individuals outside. And usually the person inside the bank is merely what we see as a spotter. They are identifying potential victims, which is then conveyed to actual criminals outside of the bank. So we would agree, I think in all this time, we've had one individual that was actually prosecuted as a result of that, but it's not necessarily, it's a perception at this point in time that in every matter bank officials are involved. Right. That is indeed not necessarily the case.
All right. So the report also sort of breaks down the numbers into provinces, and we see that Gauteng has the highest prevalence of these incidents at 36%. Is there a specific reason, or is it just merely because this is the economic hub of the country?
Certainly, obviously, being the economic hub, probably the majority of the population hanging around in this particular province would be why it's so rife here. But it's in your major metro areas, Gauteng obviously leading in most cases, with followed by the likes of KwaZulu-Natal and the Western Cape. But all the provinces are affected to a minimal extent, But those three provinces obviously make up the bulk of these incidents.
I was also looking at cash in transit heist or robberies. We know they sort of became a common phenomenon in the country, but looking at the numbers, it sort of reflects a downward trend.
Absolutely right. If you look at the latter part of 2018, where we experienced quite a, well, actually the second and third quarters of 2018, leading into the fourth quarter, there were quite a number of incidents. I mean, you can merely recall some of them that were on social media, where vehicles were attacked, and the decrease is attributed mainly to the efforts by the South African Police Service, the cash in transit companies, and the banks that have actually participated and collaborated in terms of addressing this through mitigation.
And I suppose in conclusion, tips for consumers could be that do not ever disclose your confidential details to the second person.
Absolutely, and when transacting at an ATM, make sure your hand covers the hand that's inserting the PIN, even when you do it on a POS device. Sometimes it's uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable, but it's got to be done.
It feels you don't trust anybody, but the fact of the matter is, rather do that because it's rather safe than sorry.
Yes, indeed. Kevin, thank you so much for coming through. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, well, there you have it. Kevin Twiname, he is the spokesperson for the South African Banking Risk Information Center. That's SABRIC, of course. They released their stats for 2018. This, of course, on behalf of the banking industry. So, as he said, make sure that you do not give your confidential details, banking details to anyone.